never before, including $61 billion in reckless new inflationary spending. This is costing the average Canadian family an extra $3,687 per year. Former Bank of Canada Governor David Dodge said this is the worst budget since 1982. Does the senior deputy governor agree struggling families cannot afford higher taxes and more inflationary spending that drives up the cost of everything and keeps interest rates so high?
I would agree it's been a very difficult time for Canadian households the last few years. The combination of high inflation and the response to high inflation, increase in interest rates, has been very difficult for Canadian families. Absolutely.
How much time?
1:20.
Despite a record of 9 years of failure, the Liberal government has doubled down on the same spending that has caused so much misery in the first place, pouring even more fuel on the inflationary fire and driving up interest rates. Does the Senior Deputy Director agree that instead of giving more money to bankers and bondholders, we should be investing in our doctors and nurses?
The Senior Deputy Governor doesn't make those decisions.
That's fair. Do you agree with it, though, the statement?
I don't make those decisions, so I don't weigh those choices. That's not my job.
So you don't have an opinion on it. Okay. Last week, the Bank of Canada Governor also warned Canadians that unaffordable housing will continue into the future. This follows a recent report from the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, which confirmed that housing construction is plummeting as prices get more expensive. Under this current government, housing starts will be lower in 2025-26 than they were in 2020-2021. On top of this, the CMHC forecasted that rents will rise and vacancy rates will fall as more people compete for less housing. Does the Senior Deputy Director agree that Liberal government are simply not building enough homes for Canadians to live in?
The Senior Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada would agree that we have a housing supply shortage in this country, and it is driving up the price of housing, one of the things that's adding to the difficulty for many households. That supply problem in housing has been with us for a long time, and it's not something that can be fixed quickly. Supply of houses is something that's going to take a long time and a concerted effort and a lot of cooperation from different levels of government to fix. And we're pleased to see that cooperation is accelerating.
Thank you very much. That is the time. Ms. Bradford, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Conservatives often scoff at the fact that we have a AAA credit rating, and I believe we're one of the only countries that managed to maintain that coming out of the financial situation imposed on us by COVID. So I was just wondering if you could please explain in simple terms what this means to Canadians and how important a AAA credit rating is, and why it shouldn't be casually dismissed.
Yes, I can answer. Thank you. Basically, AAA is the highest rating that you can get in the market. So it means that the debt we're issuing in the market is the safest instrument that you can find, which at the end of the day made our product like basically price higher than any other one. So when price is higher, rates are lower, and it makes us in a better place to finance our debt at a much lower rate than any other country.
Right. Okay, so that's a big advantage then to Canada and to all of our companies and like even consumer interest rates, because it's all relative, right?
Exactly, because the Government of Canada debt is the benchmark for all the other debt instruments in the country.
And because we had AAA credit rating going into COVID, and we were in such a good financial shape, we were able to take on, the government was able to take on a lot of debt to help support Canadian families and businesses at a lower cost because we could take advantage of that AAA credit rating, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Now, we also saw that the PBO has reported how higher than projected spending by provincial governments have posed an upside risk. Like, it's not just the federal government that spends public funds. The provinces do as well. And their debt ratio, I believe, is considerably higher in most cases than the federal government's, and so their borrowing costs are more. If provincial governments were to step up and help Canadians the way that we have at the federal level, how could that positively impact the federal finances?
I think we already kind of answered that question already. Like it depends on what exactly they will spend on. But at the end of the day, if they're helping customers in Canada, that should have benefit. That should benefit the aggregate Canadians. So that should be a positive outcome.
Okay. I wanted to turn now to look at the impact on the economy of climate change. And the Bank of Canada has done substantial work on the potential financial stability implications of climate change alongside other central banks. So, Ms. Rogers, can you speak about this work and describe what some of the key climate risks are to the financial stability of Canada?
Sure. We think of climate-related financial risk, climate-related financial stability risk really in two categories. The sort of easiest one and most obvious one is what we call physical risk. So this is the actual damage to the economy of climate events. And basically the knock-on damage that has to the financial system. So we've done some work in this area where we have modeled things like flood risk to financial institutions. So we looked at the impact on insurers, the impact on banks, and sort of the connection between those two things. We've done a number of studies. We cooperate with the financial institutions themselves and with the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions. So there's a number of reports you can find on our website that look at this risk. I would characterize the conclusion that we've not yet seen these risks on a scale that would destabilize the financial system as a whole, but it very much depends on the size of the shock and the transmission across different participants in the financial sector, the scale of the impact.
There's a lot of concern that there are some places that won't be able to get insurance because of adverse weather conditions and the pattern. For example, in Florida, certain areas have uninsurable mortgages in high climate risk areas. So if we're looking at home insurance, if the value of insurance becomes less available or prohibitively expensive, this could get in the way of home ownership. And if we can't get home insurance, you can't get a mortgage. A lending institution isn't going to give you a mortgage if you can't get insurance. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, I mean, you've described one of the risks for
Right.
sure.
Right. So that's a bit of a concern, right?
Yeah. The other risk that we think of is what we call transition risk, which is the risk that the price or the value of assets will change as a result of climate risks themselves or policies to address climate risks. So you could see sharp repricing of assets or repricing of risks in the economy that could be destabilizing. So that's what we characterize.
Thank you. That is your time, Ms. Bradford. Turn now to Mr. Nader, our third round. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, thank you to our witnesses for joining us. I'm going to begin with the Bank of Canada and hope we can get some kind of general questions out of the way off the bat. Was reviewing kind of what is currently there in terms of treasury bills and domestic marketable bonds, and my understanding is treasury bills about 276 billion outstanding, and about a little over $1 trillion in terms of bonds. Am I right to assume that as these mature, they are reallocated, re-put out for purchase at whatever the rate would be at the current time? Am I right in assuming that?
I'm going to start by asking Coralia to just clarify the numbers.
The numbers you're citing are on the government statements, so I will let Department of Finance respond.
Those numbers are correct. Basically, we have around 270 billion in T-bills. The way it works, our debt will come to maturity. We issue our debt through auctions, and it's basically a primary dealer distribution. So we have a number of dates that are already set up that we announce at the beginning of the quarter. And basically, most of the debt that we're showing is debt that's rolling over, that we call. So I think this year we have 85% of the overall envelope that will be debt that will be rolling over that will need to be reissued in the market.
And when it's reissued in the market, if it's at a higher rate than it was prior to maturity, that increases our costs.
Of course, like it will be issued at market rate. So depending on where the rate is, and that will depend, like that will impact the interest, the debt charges that we'll have on that debt.
And so, that's exactly it. So as it matures, if it stays high, it costs Canadians more money. I want to look at the analysis, though, of the bonds. Would you be able to tell us, or is there? Could you provide the committee with a breakdown of who owns those bonds, whether it's domestic ownership or international ownership?
Yes, I can. So basically, in Canada, most of our debt, first of all, it's all issued in Canadian dollar. Most of the debt is owned by Canadian. We have 30% of our debt that's owned by foreigners. When we compare this share to other countries, other G7 countries, we're in the low range, which is really positive for Canada. Otherwise, we have around 25% that's currently owned by the Bank of Canada. The rest of it will be owned by institutional investors through basically savings that individual Canadian will put in banks and basically be funneled through the basically instrument that will include GOCs, Government of Canada debt.
Looking at the international number, about 30%, give or take, how much of that is owned by foreign states, and how much is that owned by foreign individuals or foreign entities?
That's a good question. I don't have the exact number, but for sure, what we know is that our debt, a lot of it is being owned by foreign bank, because that's part of a portfolio that's highly recognized around the world, where banks will buy a set of like a number of different commodities, including Canadian dollar, and basically in order to meet that target, they will buy GOCs. So most of our debt that's owned on the foreign side is owned by central banks.
Would you be able to give us a not today, but provide the committee with a breakdown of that, which entities own that foreign debt?
We could try, but one thing that you should be aware is once we issue our debt through the primary market, it's distributed like in the secondary market. So we don't know exactly who owns our debt. There's data that are available through Statistics Canada. That's what I've been able to provide you. So I can validate if there's more information available, but I don't think we'll be able to provide a disaggregated number on this.
I appreciate that. Anything you can provide, that'd be useful for my own personal interest. In the short time I may have left, I want to go back to the GDP per capita, and perhaps we'll go with Ms. Rogers with this one. Could you compare our decline in GDP per capita with our peer countries, thinking mainly about the United States, where we've seen them increase in per capita GDP growth compared to Canada? Could you comment on that?
I don't have exact numbers in front of me. If you're asking me to give you exact data, or
not exact data, just how we compare to our friends south of the border.
Well, I think you characterized it accurately, but quite honestly, I don't have a GDP per capita in the U.S. and GDP per capita in Canada, so it's difficult for me to give you a comparison. I can come back.
That is your time, Mr. Nader. Thank you. Turning now to Ms. Shanahan. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I thank our witnesses for being here today and answering our questions. It's being very patient with sort of questions coming from all over the field, and that's why my first question actually to you, Ms. Rogers, is around your mandate, because there does seem to be some confusion in what we hear in the House of Commons and so on between monetary policy, fiscal policy, economic policy, social policy, and so forth. And what is your mandate and the Bank of Canada, and what is the Bank of Canada responsible for?
The Bank of Canada's mandate is to steer the Canadian economy in the long-term best interest of Canadians by keeping inflation low and stable. So we're responsible for monetary policy.
Does the Government of Canada have anything to do then with monetary policy? The executive, I'm saying, the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, any of those roles have anything
well,
to
certainly
do
there's
with?
a number of accountability mechanisms that are in place. I would say the most important of which, or the cornerstone, would be what we call our inflation target renewal agreement, which is an agreement that sets the bank's objectives, including the target rate of inflation. It also outlines sort of the broad policy toolkit available to the bank. That is an agreement that is renewed once every 5 years following a broad round of consultation with the Canadian public. So that process will be getting underway soon because the next renewal date for the agreement is in 2026. So we consider that to be sort of our cornerstone mandate document, the agreement that we have with the government on what our objectives are. Beyond that, there's a sort of a whole series of what I would call accountability mechanisms that support the independence of the Bank of Canada. We have an independent board of directors. We are audited annually by 2 separate audit firms. The Minister of Finance can, at any time, request an expansion of the scope of those audits or order a special audit. The Governor and I appear regularly before your colleagues at the House Finance Committee, also at the Senate Bank and Finance Committee, and of course here today. At every rate decision, the Governor and I hold a press conference and a press availability. We've also recently started publishing a summary of our deliberations that underpin each of our rate decisions. We annually publish an assessment of financial stability and hold a press availability. We'll be doing that for this year on Thursday of this week. And we publish an annual report. So I don't think, have I forgotten anything, Coralie? I think that's sort of the long list of what I would call accountability mechanisms in place to support our mandate and our independence.
But if the Prime Minister didn't like what you were doing, should the Prime Minister just be able to dismiss the Governor of the Bank of Canada and interfere in that decision-making process?
The legislation puts the Governor in place for a period of 7 years, as well as myself. We're in for a term of 7 place. The Prime Minister does not, in that legislation, the dismissal of the Governor does not occur by directive, no.
Well, thank you very much for that comprehensive answer. Now, can you explain how the Bank of Canada's financial results are presented in the Public Accounts of Canada 2023, given that that is the topic that we are here today to discuss?
Sure, I'm going to ask my colleague to answer that because, as I said, it's a little bit complicated given that our year ends are different. So the numbers it's not easy to find the number in our financial statements and the same number in their financial statements, but Coralie can give you that breakdown.
Yes, thank you for your question. Yes, so we prepare our annual financial statements that are from January to December, but then we also provide the data for the fiscal year of the public accounts, which is April to March. We provide that to the Department of Finance, Receiver General of Canada, after the numbers are audited by our 2 auditors. And so when it is rolled up into the public accounts, it's integrated into the overall public account numbers. So you will see our results in the public accounts.
Very good. So then can you explain what led to the losses from 2020 to 2023? What are the total amount of the losses, including the indemnities paid by the Government of Canada?
Yes, so just to clarify, the losses have incurred in the public accounts starting in 22-23. So current public accounts loss is $3.1 billion. The previous years we had surpluses, including a surplus of 2.4 for the previous year. Overall, we are estimating, and it's important to note that the forecast we have is based on the market view of the interest path and also assumptions on the evolution of our balance sheet. But based on the latest forecast, we're forecasting that the total loss would be about $9 billion. It will be over a period of an extra 2 years. So this first year of losses and an extra 2 years, after which we are expecting to be back in a net income position. That net income will allow us to offset the accumulated losses And by 2029, we're forecasting that we'll be back in a positive net position.
Thank you. That is the time, I'm afraid, Ms. Shanahan. We went well over. Turning now to, encore une fois, Mr. Lemire. 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
2.5 minutes, Mr. Lemire. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm quite aware of the consultation process. Mrs. Rogers, how was it conducted with Indigenous populations? Was this integrated in the conception of a new $20 bill where we see King Charles, given that the British monarchy is oftentimes perceived as being offensive to Indigenous peoples? And as a Quebecer, we've expressed our detachment with regards to the monarchy. Did you have any choice of having King Charles or, well,
I would make two remarks in response to your question. First, directly to your question about the choice of having King Charles appear on the 20. I think it's a long-standing tradition to have the monarch on our $20 bill. But to your other question, we do a broad consultation on the various images that appear on our currency, including with the Indigenous community. And you will have seen us incorporate a number of images in various bills over the last few years, and we will continue to consult with the Indigenous community going forward.
Je comprends que c'est une tradition.
I understand that it's a long-standing tradition to have the image of the Queen, but would this not have been an opportunity to modernize the image of the Bank of Canada and even Canada?
I think we'll continue to modernize our bills. We'll continue to consult the public on the images that we use on our currency. Absolutely. As I said, we do that now, and we do specifically consult with the Indigenous community. We have incorporated their feedback on a number of our bills recently.
De quelle façon vous consultez les
How do you consult with Indigenous communities?
We have a number of different advisory committees, but we do have an advisory committee of Indigenous members, elders. We have gone out to communities. We've invited them into our premises. So there's a variety of different ways.
Intéressant. Merci.
Interesting. Thank you.
Next up, Mr. Desjardins, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes again, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm inclined to comment on who the Indigenous communities are. It's oftentimes a large failure of the government to properly consult. I'll quickly ask the question to the Bank of Canada. Who are the people or the nations? Can you name one of them?
I'm sorry, I came here prepared for public accounts, but I would be very happy to get that information back to the committee. I would be very pleased to provide some additional detail. Yeah.
Sure. I'll provide a recommendation as well to state that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is one such that affects all of us, including the Bank of Canada, including you, Ms. Rogers, and it's a commitment that all public officials, anyone who serves the public, must undertake as a process to understand and better understand how we can better serve our country, to understand that legacy and how it may impact people. So I'll leave that as a note, and I'll look forward to that supply of documents. You know, in regards to the public debate of deficit in Canada, it's been one that's been a long time coming. I was pleased to hear about the renewal date of 2026 for the target inflation rate. New Democrats for a very long period of our history, stemming back to the 1980s, even, you know, our conservative colleague mentioned the 1982 budget. There are often debated publicly two ways to control public debt. One is to raise taxes, the other is to cut spending. We often never hear of the third way, which is to, in fact, reduce real interest rates. Does the Bank of Canada have any comments on that? Or I guess it wouldn't be the Bank of Canada, so more than the Department of Finance, sorry, about the contemplation of policies related to the reducing real interest rates or policies to affect that.
I think you refer to real interest rate. This is a combination of the nominal interest rate and the inflation. So the government of Canada doesn't have any policy in order to fix or or impact the real interest rate. This is more like for the Bank of Canada by setting up the inflation target and the nominal interest rate.
In terms of like those agreements that set the Bank of Canada's target, who supplies information to those agreements? Is it the Department of Finance and the Prime Minister's office, or who should we seek accountability to in relation to those agreements?
There's a broad public consultation as part of the inflation targeting renewal. So each time we renew the agreement, we do it a little bit differently, but it always includes consultation. Certainly, we seek out academic input. There's a lot of research, both from our own researchers at the bank and from the broader research community that feeds into this. Civil society groups, businesses, government organizations at the provincial and the federal level. So it's a very broad, very robust engagement process to get input.
Thank you. That is your time. As chair, I'm often given the right for a few questions. I've got a couple here, so I'm going to take the time here and just looking for some kind of quick responses. First of all, Ms. Shanahan, thank you for raising it, because the Bank of Canada was brought in here today to talk about the losses that you're incurring now, where previously you'd always been a net contributor. You have turned into a net debtor now. Could we get a copy of you had mentioned it at a previous question and then referenced it. Could we get the time you expect to go from deficit into surplus? And then even beyond that, if you see a net to come out ahead, we would appreciate that. Is that something we can get? Good.
Yes, for sure.
Deputy Governor Rogers, it's your position, the bank's position, that the Government of Canada's deficit spending is not inflationary. Is that correct?
What we said at testimony last week is that the budget, our initial look at the most recent federal budget is that we don't expect it to contribute materially to inflation, but that the budget came out between forecasts. And as part of the next forecast, we will incorporate the budget. Okay.
Now, did the governor himself make reference that provincial deficit spending could be harmful to the inflationary outlook and could cause inflation? I read something about that. Could you clarify that, please?
Well, I think what the governor said is something he said many times before, is that when we do our forecast and when we look at inflation, we take all forms of government spending in. We don't distinguish between one government and another. We take it all in, and we measure its impact on inflation. And so whether there's regardless of the source of the spending, if the spending is outpacing growth.
So let me ask you, what's the bank's view then currently of the amount of debt we're seeing spent at the provincial level, and what impact that's having on inflation?
Well, there's different provincial governments have made different decisions. Again, I would repeat what the governor has said. The economy, if governments are spending at a pace in excess of the growth rate of the economy, that is naturally going to be inflationary no matter what government is making that spending.
Thank you. You and Mr. Scheer were in a discussion about productivity gains. You had your statement on a more productive economy would be beneficial in I don't know the terms used, sticky inflation, or a less conducive inflation environment. That's basically what you said. Is that in response to?
Yeah, basically I said when we look ahead, somebody asked me earlier about demographic shifts, and I've also talked a little bit today about climate.
I want to talk about productivity.
I'm getting there. Climate effects. There's a number of things going forward that we expect will make it a less benign inflationary environment. It'll be more upward pressure on inflation. Sure. A really good way to buffer the Canadian economy in that environment going forward would be to improve our productivity.
Okay. And you were saying anything that kind of impacts capital flows would have a negative impact and therefore contribute to in inflation possibly. Is that right?
Well, what I said was that one of the things that would boost our productivity is to increased investment, and so creating a climate to encourage investment would be.
So Mr. Scheer didn't go where I thought he would, which is then what's the bank's view of the capital gains tax increase, which of course is the tax which most impacts capital flows in and out of a country, and the capital gains tax inclusion rate, of course, is going to go from 50% to 2/3, and we see all kinds of warnings. What's the bank's view on that?
Thanks for your question, Mr. Chair. We are not tax experts. We do not take a view on any one tax measure. The government has a number of decisions to make to balance their budget, to create the right conditions for the economy.
Okay, look, that you're the Bank of Canada. You had a lot to say previously about the impact of climate policy. You're telling me the bank does not have a position on a capital gains tax increase that
Point of order,
investors
Chair.
are worried. Yes, Mr. Desjardins.
I believe that your latitude as our chair in this regard has stepped into overreach. And I believe that the questions that you're now pursuing are largely in favor of the Conservative Party.
Well, I can take the side. I don't believe that. I think I'm asking some pretty nonpartisan questions that I'm hearing across the country, Mr. Desjardins. I have about 45 seconds. I'd ask your leave to continue. I'm going to actually maybe check with the clerk here. So just 1 second. Why don't I finish my my last bit of time then on the side, Mr. Desjardins, and I'll let Ms. Yip take the chair. Would that satisfy you?
I'm happy for you to finish your questioning,
Okay.
just as long as we know the
All right.
parameters.
Thank you.
Of the question.
No, I think it's a fair question. One leads to an example. I hope the deputy governor can maybe give us any insight she might have, or the bank might have on a tax. On a tax that impacts capital flows, which she said would be a problem.
But do we all get this equal amount of time? Will I have another question to ask about?
Sorry, Mr.
why
Judge.
not- why?
I've taken the conservative spot. No, I'm sorry. I thought I said at the top. I've taken the conservative
I
spot.
understand.
Yeah. Pardon me.
No, I
I'm not.
apologize, Chair.
This is not. Yeah.
thought
You know,
this
I was sorry.
Stepping into our other time.
No.
I understand.
No. Okay.
Please carry on.
Yeah. Thank you. You have the floor.
I would repeat my previous answer. The Bank of Canada, we are not tax experts. It's
Okay,
also
then let me just stop you there. So you mentioned something else which was really interesting. You said that at the height of the crisis, 2020, 2021, when the government was looking at providing benefits to individuals, you said something like, the bank took the position that we did not think it was worth hitting Canadians with a credit crunch. It sounds like you put aside also monetary policy as well and made a policy decision. Instead of looking at the fundamentals, you made a decision to let interest, to not worry about inflation. So my question, I suppose my last question for you is, does the Bank of Canada have any responsibility for the inflation and affordability crisis that we find ourselves in today, given that you misjudged the inflationary cycle we were in, you waited to raise interest rates, and then when you finally hit them, instead of tapping the brakes, you had to slam them on? What's the bank's role in today's affordability crisis and interest rate environment we're in that is also hurting home ownership?
I think what I said, Mr. Chair, was that in June of 2020, when we were making decision to take extraordinary monetary policy actions.
So I don't want you to repeat I want you to answer my question about the bank's role in today's affordability crisis. That's what I want you to answer. You've mentioned the Ukraine war. You've mentioned all sorts of other variables. You have not addressed the bank's role in today's environment. And what is it? Does the bank take any ownership of today's environment? And that's my last question. I look for your answer.
I think the best way for me to answer your question, Mr. Chair, is to say something that the Governor and I have both said publicly before, which is we didn't get everything perfect. We didn't make every decision perfectly. We did not have perfect foresight. We were dealing with the same high level of uncertainty that all Canadians were facing at the time. We took the best judgments in the interest of Canadians that we could with the amount of information that we had at the time. We did our job, which is to implement the policy that we judged to be the best to guide the Canadian economy in the long term.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Cervera, you have the last 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to everyone this afternoon. It's great to be
to be back on public accounts. I was here a couple of years ago, and I very much enjoyed it, and look forward to picking up again. To the Deputy Governor, I take it the Bank of Canada is really solely responsible for monetary policy, not fiscal policy, correct?
Correct.
Yes, and I just wanted to put that on record. And secondly, just to get something also on record, I did earlier this afternoon, I had a chance to speak on the Budget Implementation Act from the Governor's comments with regards to when he presented at the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance on May 2nd with regards to the forecast and so forth. I'll just read 2 lines. I just want to make sure I've got this correct. Second, growth in the economy looks to be picking up. We expect GDP growth to be solid this year and to strengthen further in 2025. That is from the statement that the Bank of Canada Governor commented. I would confirm that with you.
Sounds accurate.
Yes, and that overall we forecast GDP growth in Canada 1.5% this year and about 2% in 2025-26. This strengthening economy will gradually absorb excess supply through 2025 and 2026. Deputy Governor, I tend to think of the world of the last 1,000 days, what we've gone through, and then looking forward the next 100 days or 200 days, whatever you want to take it. And my one comment is we are seeing inflation go the correct direction in terms of expectations are anchoring on both the consumer and business side. Would you not concur with that?
We have seen expectations, inflation expectations in the business sector stay fairly anchored. They're still, in our view, a little bit elevated in the consumer sector, but they're coming down, yes.
Thank you. Secondly, from the public accounts, I very much do enjoy reading the 3 books in a weird way, but from the public accounts, the sort of the losses that are recorded, is there not a certain aspect of when there, if I remember my accounting correctly, unrealized gains and unrealized losses from holding securities, and if you hold those securities to maturity or when rates revert to the mean, that they're reversed. Is that not correct?
Yes, so there's the member earlier, I think it was Member Shanahan, asked about the indemnity. And the indemnity is exactly that. It indemnifies the bank against the fair market value change in our investment portfolio. That is not a realized loss. It would not move to the into the category of our income statement and our losses unless we disposed of those assets, which is not our plan, unless we sold the assets to the market.
Exactly, and if you think of my banking days, if you think about what would happen in, say, the United States a few months ago with some of the smaller banks or the mid-sized banks, or in terms of any financial system, when an entity holds, or even going back to the financial crisis, when you hold assets that may have been marked down in value and you have to be forced selling, you result in a liquidity situation. That is not a situation with a central bank. That's not the situation at all.
Correct.
Okay. And for this, for my edification, I guess I'll ask this. In terms of the way the banks, we are public accounts and not finance, in terms of the way the bank executes monetary policy, can you care to comment on that, please?
I'm sorry, I don't, can you?
In terms of the monetary transmission index.
Sorry, and I'm also having trouble hearing you. Sorry.
Sorry, in terms of using the Bank of Canada rates, overnight rates, and obviously the posted rates.
How monetary policy works. Okay.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Well, I mean, our policy rate sets the overnight rate, and the overnight rate is the rate at which other interest rates are anchored to. So really, we set sort of a baseline interest rate that transmits into the rate that people pay for business loans and mortgages and other forms of debt.
20 seconds. I've been pausing the clock, and whenever the question is restated again to give everyone fair time.
No, thank you, Chair. That is very kind of you. And on the inflationary front, because I will go back to that, we have seen a marked decrease. I would say, where is the shelter component and rent component tracking? Is it tracking to your expectations, the bank's expectations, or is it still sticky?
It's still sticky and it's still elevated, and so it is a big contributor to the above target inflation right now. That's one of the reasons that we we look at a variety of measures, and that we're particularly focused on core measures, because it does trim out the things that are sort of outliers, including in shelter inflation right now. But it is still it's still contributing, and it's still a reality for Canadians.
That is your time. Thank you very much, and thank you, Ms. Rogers, Ms. Boulos. Merci beaucoup, Mr. Moreau. Mr. Moreau, merci beaucoup, Ms. Dancy. Thank you very much. We appreciate you all coming in and participating. For any information that you've promised us, it can be submitted to the analysts. Pour toute question, veuillez consulter la graphie.
You can consult with the clerk if you still have questions.
The witnesses to leave and to go on camera. So I'll suspend for 5 minutes and we'll come back here. And if any members are online, this is you, Mr. Desjardins. If you can sign out and then come back into Zoom, please. Thank you very much. This meeting is suspended for 5.